Elena woke before sunrise, the house still wrapped in the kind of silence that made every small sound feel like a warning. She reached for Daniel's side of the bed, expecting warmth, but found only cold sheets. Her breath caught. He hadn't slept there at all. By the fifth step toward the hallway, two questions slammed into her chest. How long had Daniel been living two lives under one roof? And why did she suddenly feel like a stranger in her own marriage? Downstairs, the kettle clicked on by itself, triggered by the timer Daniel always set. A normal sound on a normal morning, except nothing felt normal. Her eye caught his briefcase on the table, slightly open, a sliver of white peeking out. She shouldn't look. She knew she shouldn't. But her fingers didn't listen. Inside, she found his wedding ring, and a sealed envelope with no name. Her pulse thundered. Outside, gravel crunched. Elena moved to the window and froze. A man stood near the edge of their yard, watching. Not moving, not blinking. And as she gripped the envelope tighter, a single horrifying thought dropped into her mind. What if Daniel wasn't the one she needed to fear? She let out a shaky breath. Behind her, a door latch clicked. Someone else was in the house. Elena stood perfectly still, her hand still clenching the envelope as the soft metallic click echoed through the house. Her heart pounded so loudly, she almost couldn't hear her own breath. She whispered Daniel's name, hoping he would answer, hoping the morning wasn't about to collapse into something she couldn't undo. But silence answered her, heavy and worn. She stepped toward the living room, her voice trembling as she called again. Nothing. The stillness inside the house felt wrong, like a room holding its breath. Just as she reached the doorway, her phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with Daniel's name, but instead of relief, a cold wave washed over her. Why would he call her from outside their home? Why wasn't he inside? She answered with shaking fingers, her voice cracking. He spoke softly, too softly, asking if she was awake. But something in his tones sounded distant, almost rehearsed. She asked where he was. A beat of silence. Then he whispered that he was on his way, though she knew he hadn't left for work yet. Her fear deepened. Someone was inside, and it wasn't Daniel. Elena whispered into the phone, telling Daniel she heard someone inside. His reaction wasn't what she expected. He didn't gasp, didn't panic. He only exhaled slowly, as though this moment had been creeping toward them for a long time. He told her not to move, not to touch anything, and definitely not to open the envelope. The urgency in his voice made her chest tighten. She asked him again where he really was, why he sounded so far away, why he wasn't rushing home. His silence lasted a single second too long. Then he told her something that chilled her. Elena, whatever you do, don't look outside. She turned her head instantly, instincts overriding logic, and saw the same man still standing in the fog. He hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. His presence felt like a warning carved into stone. She whispered to Daniel, asking who the man was, why he was watching their home. But Daniel's answer was swallowed by sudden static, the call breaking into fragments before cutting out completely. She stared at the dead screen, feeling the walls closing in. The moment the call dropped, the house seemed to close in on itself. Elena stepped back, her breath hitching as she tried to steady her hands. She moved toward the window, needing to convince herself she wasn't imagining things, that the man outside wasn't real. But he was still there, silent, steady, watching her with a focus that made her stomach twist. She whispered a shaky plea into the empty room, begging Daniel to call back, to tell her what was happening, to end this nightmare before it began. A floorboard creaked behind her. She spun around, pulse spiked. She called out again, louder, her voice trembling. No answer. The house felt alive with tension. every corner holding its own secret. She edged forward, refusing to let fear pin her in place. As she passed the table, her hand brushed Daniel's wedding ring. The cold metal sent a shock through her. Why would he hide something like that? Why today? Why now? Her eyes lifted to the hallway, where a shadow lingered just beyond the reach of dawn light. Elena stepped toward the hallway, each movement deliberate, each breath shallow. She told herself she wasn't in danger, that this was all some terrible misunderstanding, that Daniel would walk through the door any second and explain everything. But her body knew better. Her instincts whispered that the truth was no longer something she could avoid. As she approached the shadowed doorway, the air turned colder, almost heavy. Her hand brushed the wall for balance. Another creak sounded, closer this time. Elena's pulse roared in her ears as she leaned in, desperate to see what waited beyond the dark frame. For a moment, she considered running outside, screaming for help, confronting the man watching them. But something held her in place, something she couldn't name. She whispered, "Daniel's name one last time." And then the shadow moved. Slow, purposeful, unmistakable. Someone stepped forward just enough for her to see the faint outline of a figure. And in that instant, she realized the morning wasn't the beginning of a mystery. It was the beginning of a truth she had never imagined. Elena barely slept after the morning's terror. She sat on the couch as the sun climbed higher, trying to piece together what she'd seen, what she'd heard, what Daniel refused to explain. When he finally walked through the door, he acted as if nothing strange had happened. His calmness almost frightened her more than the shadow in the hallway. She asked where he had gone, why he'd called instead of coming inside, why he sounded so far away. He brushed it off with a tight smile, telling her it was just work, the same excuse he had used too many times lately. But the way he avoided looking at her made her stomach twist. She told him she found his wedding ring in his briefcase. For a moment, his expression cracked, just a flicker. But it was enough to confirm everything she feared. He claimed he removed it for safety at a construction site, but she knew that wasn't true. Not anymore. When she asked about the envelope, his jaw tightened. He told her she was imagining things, that stress was getting to her. But the part that scared her most wasn't his lie. It was how practiced it sounded. After Daniel left for work, Elena grabbed her keys and drove straight to Maya's apartment, her hands trembling the entire ride. Maya opened the door with her usual bright energy, but the moment she saw Elena's face, all lightness faded. Elena told her everything. The ring, the envelope, the man in the fog, the strange call. Maya listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from concern to suspicion to something sharper. When Elena finished, Maya asked the question Elena was too afraid to consider. What if Daniel wasn't telling lies to protect her, but to protect himself? Elena tried to defend him, but the words fell apart in her throat. She didn't know what to believe anymore. Maya urged her to stop pretending everything was fine, to follow her instincts before the situation grew worse. She reminded Elena that secrets never stay buried, no matter how deep someone tries to hide them. Elena nodded, but her heart felt heavier than ever. She wanted answers would destroy, yet feared what those answers would destroy. Later that afternoon, Elena tried calling Daniel again, hoping he might finally tell her the truth, but every call went straight to voicemail. She tried to stay calm, but anxiety pressed against her ribs like a tightening fist. She drove to the cafe near his office, hoping to catch him on his break. When she spotted him through the window, her breath caught. He wasn't alone. He sat in a corner booth, leaning in close, speaking in a hushed tone to his sister Sophia. Elena watched Sophia shake her head, her expression tense and conflicted. Elena stepped inside, just in time to see Daniel slide a small folder across the table. Sophia pushed it back, her lips forming the words, "I can't keep doing this." Before Elena could move closer, Daniel glanced up. The shock on his face wasn't the shock of someone seeing his wife. It was the shock of someone caught. He stood abruptly, blocking Sophia as if shielding her from view. Elena felt the weight of another question pressing inside her. If Sophia knew something, why had she stayed silent all this time? Daniel hurried toward Elena before she could approach the booth, insisting they leave. His voice was low, almost desperate, as though afraid Sophia might say something he couldn't control. Elena demanded an explanation, but he spoke over her, guiding her toward the door with a forced calmness that only heightened her suspicion. When she finally stopped walking, he exhaled sharply as if running out of ways to maintain the fragile illusion he'd built. She asked him why he was meeting Sophia in secret, why he passed her a folder, why he looked terrified she might open it. He insisted it was family business, something she didn't need to worry about. But Elena had lived with Daniel long enough to recognize when he was hiding behind vague words. She told him she wouldn't keep pretending. The truth was bleeding through everything now. The morning fog, the envelope, the look in Sophia's eyes. Daniel begged her to trust him, but the plea rang hollow, weighed down by secrets he refused to share. The drive home was silent. Daniel's fingers drummed restlessly against the steering wheel, the rhythm too anxious to be casual. Elena watched him, the distance between them feeling wider than the road ahead. When they pulled into the driveway, he stepped out quickly, heading straight for the house without waiting for her. That small action told her more than any of his words had. Inside, he moved around the kitchen with false normalcy, muttering about dinner plans. Elena finally told him she wasn't leaving the room until he gave her the truth. The words hung between them like a blade. Daniel froze, shoulders stiffening before he slowly turned to face her. His eyes held something she couldn't read. Fear, regret, maybe both. But before he could speak, a sharp knock echoed through the house. Elena started. Daniel's face drained of color. He whispered for her not to answer it, and that one sentence shattered any illusion she had left. The knocking didn't stop. Each hit against the door sent a fresh jolt through Elena's nerves. Daniel stood frozen, staring at the hallway as though a nightmare he'd outrun for years had finally found him. Elena whispered his name, but he didn't move. When she stepped toward the door, he reached out and gripped her arm, not rough, but desperate. He shook his head once, silently begging her to open it. She could feel the tremor running through him. Whatever he feared wasn't small. The knocking suddenly stopped, replaced by heavy footsteps pacing outside. Elena pulled away from Daniel and inched toward the window. When she peeked out, her breath caught. The same man from the fog stood on their porch, closer than ever, his hand resting calmly at his side as if he had all the time in the world. She whispered to Daniel, demanding to know who he was and what he wanted. Daniel whispered only one word: trouble. And that single word widened the crack in their marriage until it felt like it might split open completely. Elena stepped back from the window, her voice shaking as she demanded answers. Daniel pressed his palms to his face, muttering that he needed more time, that he wasn't ready to explain. But time was exactly what had run out. When the footsteps outside faded, Elena rushed to the door and pulled it open despite Daniel's protest. The porch was empty, the street silent. Only the fading glow of sunset remained, stretching long shadows across the driveway. Daniel insisted they should leave the house, but Elena refused. She told him she was done walking blindly through whatever secret life he was hiding. He reached for her again, but she stepped away. The distance between them had stopped feeling emotional. It had become physical, a divide carved by fear. Daniel finally whispered that the man wasn't a stranger at all, that he'd known him once, long before Elena ever came into his life. That the past had come back for him. Elena felt her breath catch again. Every new answer only raised another terrifying question. Elena stepped outside, scanning the street, her heart hammering. Daniel followed reluctantly, urging her to get back inside. Before she could answer, a car door slammed somewhere down the block. She flinched, turning sharply, and there he was. The fog from that morning had lifted, but Lucas's presence felt just as chilling. He walked toward them, slow but certain, as if he expected this moment. Daniel placed himself slightly in front of Elena, but Lucas raised a hand, telling them he wasn't here to hurt her. Elena demanded to know who he was. Lucas introduced himself with a calmness that felt strange against the tension saturating the air. He said he had been looking for Daniel for months, that things Daniel had tried to bury were rising again. Daniel's face drained of color as Lucas mentioned the debt, a phrase Elena had never heard before. She stared between them, feeling the ground shift under her feet. Her husband wasn't just hiding something. He was hiding from something. Elena demanded clarity. No more evasions, no more excuses. Lucas looked directly at her and told her that Daniel had once trusted him, long before everything went sideways. Daniel tried to interrupt, but Lucas held up a hand. He explained that Daniel wasn't the man Elena thought he was, not because he was cruel or unfaithful, but because he had survived something dangerous and never told her. Elena listened, breath unsteady. Lucas said that Daniel had discovered something years ago, something he wasn't supposed to see, and had exposed people who didn't forgive easily. Daniel whispered that he had tried to keep Elena safe by staying silent, but silence had only brought the danger closer. Elena felt torn between anger and heartbreak. She wanted to run from the truth and cling to it at the same time. She turned to Daniel and asked him directly what he had done. His answer came soft, almost broken. Something that can't be undone. The air felt heavier as Lucas stepped closer, lowering his voice. He told Elena he didn't come to threaten her. He came to warn her. The people from Daniel's past had resurfaced, and they weren't just looking for closure. They wanted revenge. Daniel insisted he had everything under control, but the quiver in his words betrayed him. Elena asked Lucas why he was helping them. Lucas hesitated before admitting that he owed Daniel his life, that the danger wasn't just Daniel's, it was now hers too. Elena felt her world tilt. She accused Daniel of dragging her into a life she never agreed to. He reached for her, but she stepped back, tears stinging her eyes. Lucas suggested they leave the house before nightfall, saying staying would be a mistake they might not survive. Elena's breath shook. She didn't know who to trust. But when a distant engine rumbled down the street, both Daniel and Lucas looked toward the sound with dread. Elena realized the night wasn't bringing answers. It was bringing danger. The sound of the approaching engine grew louder until it filled the entire street. Daniel grabbed Elena's arm, insisting they go inside, but she pulled away, refusing to be dragged into another lie. Lucas moved toward the curb, scanning the shadows with a tension that made her stomach knot. When a dark car slowed near the house, the three of them held their breath. The windows were tinted, the engine low and controlled. Like whoever sat inside wasn't in a hurry, because they already knew where to find them. The car paused, idling for a few heavy seconds before finally rolling past. Elena exhaled shakily, her heart pounding through her ribs. Daniel whispered that they needed to leave immediately, but Elena refused until she understood what they were running from. Lucas didn't wait for permission. He led them inside and locked the door behind them. The house felt different now. Smaller, darker, like danger had seeped into the walls. Elena finally demanded the complete truth. No more fragments, no more excuses. Daniel's eyes lowered, and for the first time, she saw real fear in them. Once inside, Lucas shut the curtains and checked every window with practiced caution. Elena watched him, realizing this wasn't the first time he'd been in danger, nor the first time Daniel had relied on him. She asked again what was happening. Daniel finally sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. He told her everything started years ago, long before they met. He'd stumbled onto evidence of illegal operations run by powerful men, and instead of turning away, he'd handed the information to the authorities. He thought he did the right thing. He didn't expect the fallout to follow him for the rest of his life. Elena listened in stunned silence. Lucas explained that the men Daniel exposed had resurfaced, more desperate and violent than before. They were hunting loose ends, and Daniel was the biggest one. Elena felt a crushing weight settle over her. Her marriage hadn't just been built on love. It had been built on omissions that now threatened to unravel everything. She whispered that she had the right to know all of it. Daniel nodded, defeated. Elena asked Daniel why he never told her. His voice cracked as he said he wanted a life free from fear. And with her, he believed he could build that illusion. Lucas stepped in, explaining that Daniel had gone underground after exposing the operation, leaving behind his old identity. Elena felt her pulse quicken. This wasn't just a secret. This was a second life. Daniel said he thought the danger had faded, that the men had disappeared or been imprisoned. But he was wrong. Something had brought them back. Something stronger than revenge alone. Elena demanded to know what they wanted now. Lucas answered quietly. They believed Daniel still had a missing piece of evidence, something they were willing to kill for. Elena's breath caught. She looked at Daniel, searching for denial, for reassurance, for anything that would make this nightmare feel smaller. But Daniel didn't deny it. His silence was confirmation. She stepped back, realizing she didn't know the man she loved. Not completely, not in the ways that mattered. Daniel finally stood, pacing the room as he admitted he kept one thing, a backup drive, something he hoped he'd never need again. Elena felt anger flare. All this time, he'd let her believe their life was ordinary, while a secret like that sat hidden in the shadows of their marriage. Lucas urged Daniel to retrieve it before the men found it first. Elena's voice trembled as she demanded to know where it was. Daniel hesitated, then whispered it was stored in a place she would never expect. The attic. Elena stared at him, feeling her heart break in ways she didn't know were possible. The attic, the place she'd always avoided because Daniel claimed it was full of old junk. Lucas moved toward the hallway, urging them to go before the night grew more dangerous. Daniel reached for Elena's hand, but she stepped away. She wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet, but she followed them because fear had replaced every other decision she could make. Moral, Mr. Trauma was fall. There's fear in the other decision she could make. The attic stairs unfolded with a creak that echoed through the house. Elena followed Lucas up, her steps slow, her breath shaky. Daniel climbed last, his silence heavy. The attic smelled of dust and forgotten years. Lucas switched on a dim bulb that flickered weakly, revealing boxes stacked like silent witnesses. Daniel moved toward an old dented metal trunk in the corner. Elena watched him hesitate before opening it. Inside lay a small black drive wrapped in cloth. He lifted it carefully as if it held the weight of his past. Elena asked what was on it. Daniel's answer was barely above a whisper. Proof that could destroy the men hunting him. Lucas urged them to leave now, saying staying in the house was no longer an option. Elena felt the cold truth settle inside her. This secret life wasn't something Daniel stepped out of. It was something he dragged into their marriage. As they turned to descend the stairs, a loud crash sounded from downstairs. Someone else was in the house. The crash from downstairs froze them in place. Elena felt her pulse jump as Lucas motioned for them to stay silent. Daniel clutched the small drive tightly, his breath sharp and uneven. Another noise, something being shoved aside, echoed up through the attic floorboards. Whoever had entered wasn't trying to hide it. They wanted to be heard. Lucas moved toward the attic entrance, quietly drawing a small pocket knife. Daniel whispered that they had been found, that this wasn't a warning anymore. This was the beginning. Elena's mind raced. She had imagined danger, feared danger. But hearing it inside her home was something else entirely. Lucas signaled again, urging them to move. Daniel told Elena to stay behind him, but she refused, stepping beside him instead. They descended the attic steps slowly, each creak of the wooden ladder sounding like a countdown. The house felt violated, stripped of the safety it once offered. As they reached the bottom, a figure moved in the shadows of the living room. Elena gripped Daniel's arm, whispering a trembling question she wished she didn't have to ask. Are they here for us? Or for you. They stepped off the ladder and crept toward the living room. The house was nearly dark, lit only by the faint glow of a lamp Daniel had left earlier. Lucas scanned every corner, moving with a soldier's precision. The noise had stopped, replaced by a suffocating quiet. Elena's breath shook as she clung to Daniel's sleeve, her eyes adjusting to the dimness. Then the shadows shifted again. Someone darted behind the dining room wall. Daniel inhaled sharply, whispering a name under his breath that Elena didn't recognize. Lucas stepped forward, knife ready, his voice firm as he told the intruder to come out. A soft chuckle answered. Elena's skin crawled. Whoever was hiding wasn't afraid. A silhouette appeared slowly, stepping from the darkness with calm, deliberate steps. Elena couldn't see his face yet, only the outline of a tall figure with broad shoulders. Daniel's hand tightened around hers until it hurt. She whispered to him, asking if he knew this man. His silence was answer enough. Whoever stood in their home wasn't a stranger. He was a ghost from Daniel's past, one that finally had a body. The silhouette stepped into the light at last, revealing a man with a cold, practiced smirk. Someone who looked like danger shaped into human form. He greeted Daniel by his old name, a name Elena had never heard spoken aloud. Daniel stiffened, the color draining from his face. Lucas shifted his stance, knife angled forward, warning him not to move any closer. But the intruder only chuckled, as though amused by their fear. He said he had been tracking Daniel for months, waiting for him to slip, waiting for the moment he reached for the drive Daniel had sworn never to use again. Elena felt her stomach twist. This was real. This man wasn't a messenger. He was a hunter. He told them the people Daniel exposed were tired of waiting. They wanted the missing evidence, and they wanted Daniel silenced. Daniel told Elena to back away, but she refused. She stepped beside him, holding her ground even as terror clawed through her. The intruder's eyes flicked to her, then back to Daniel, as if calculating exactly how much she was worth in this twisted equation. And then he smiled again. Darker this time, saying the night was far from over. The intruder stepped closer, ignoring Lucas's warning. He spoke as if he knew every fear Daniel had tried to bury. He said the people Daniel exposed wanted the drive tonight, if not willingly, then by force. Daniel tightened his grip, whispering that he would never hand it over. Lucas positioned himself slightly forward, shielding Elena with his body. But the intruder didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he reached into his jacket and tossed something onto the floor. A photo. Elena picked it up with shaking hands. It was taken through a window, of her. Elena felt the room tilt. He had been watching her for days, maybe longer. The intruder stepped closer, telling her that Daniel's silence had painted a target on her back. The final threat wasn't subtle. Giving up the drive might spare her, but refusing would bring consequences Daniel couldn't protect her from. Daniel shouted at him to stop, but Elena barely heard. Her world narrowed to one brutal truth. Daniel's past wasn't just haunting them. It was hunting them. Elena stared at the photo, the edges trembling between her fingers. This wasn't just surveillance. This was a message. She rose slowly, her voice breaking as she asked Daniel why he didn't warn her, why he let her walk blind into danger that knew her by name. Daniel insisted he was trying to protect her, but his words felt thin now, worn down by too many lies. Lucas stepped forward, telling the intruder to leave while he still could. The man laughed, saying he already had what he needed. He stepped back toward the door, promising they'd return for the drive and for Daniel. As he disappeared into the night, the front door clicked shut with a finality that made Elena's knees weaken. She turned to Daniel, tears stinging her eyes. She told him trust wasn't something she could give blindly anymore. Not after this. Daniel looked shattered. Lucas urged them to leave immediately, saying staying another minute was a risk none of them could afford. Elena nodded, her voice cracking as she whispered that running wouldn't save them. Only the truth could. They left the house with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Lucas insisted they switch cars twice, driving through back roads and empty intersections as the night deepened into something heavy and unforgiving. Elena sat in the back seat, staring out the window, her mind spiraling. Everything she thought she knew about her life had cracked open, spilling secrets she never asked to inherit. Daniel kept glancing at her through the rearview mirror, his eyes filled with guilt. He could no longer hide. But Elena couldn't look at him. Not now. Not after realizing how long she'd been living beside a truth he buried. The car finally stopped in an abandoned industrial lot, moonlight glinting off rusted metal and broken signs. Lucas said it was the only safe place for now. Elena stepped out, feeling the cold air hit her skin like a warning. Daniel approached her slowly, but she took a step back. The space between them felt like miles. She told him she needed every detail, every secret, because her life depended on it. He nodded, swallowing hard, and finally said the words she feared. "I never stopped running." Elena crossed her arms, not to block the cold, but to hold herself together. Daniel took a slow breath and began telling the story he'd tried so hard to bury. He said he used to work under a different name, part of a small team that stumbled onto a network of illegal operations run by people with far-reaching influence. He reported everything, believing justice would protect him. Instead, his team scattered, some vanished, and he was forced into hiding. Lucas was the only one who stayed by his side. Elena felt her chest tighten. She asked why he never trusted her with the truth. Daniel said he wanted a life that didn't revolve around fear, and with her, he believed he could pretend. But danger had never stopped chasing him. It had only paused. Elena's voice cracked as she told him trust wasn't something you preserve through silence. Lucas stepped forward gently, reminding Daniel that fear had turned him into a prisoner long before Elena ever knew him. Daniel bowed his head, finally admitting he didn't know how to protect her anymore. Elena shook her head, unable to understand how someone she loved so deeply could hide a past that carried such darkness. She asked Daniel what the intruders truly wanted. He hesitated before admitting the truth. The drive didn't just contain evidence. It contained names, transactions, and a final recording implicating a man who wasn't supposed to exist on paper. A man powerful enough to erase entire lives. The intruders weren't hunting Daniel out of revenge. They were hunting him out of necessity. If the drive surfaced, everything they built would collapse. Lucas added that this group didn't leave loose ends. Elena's stomach twisted painfully at the realization that she had become one. She asked Daniel if he regretted marrying her. He stepped closer despite her distance, saying he didn't regret her. He only regretted the lies. She wanted to believe him, but fear made every word feel like another fracture. Before she could respond, Lucas' posture stiffened. He heard something. A faint rumble in the distance. The night wasn't done with them. Lucas raised a hand, motioning for silence. Elena's breath caught as she followed his gaze. The distant engine grew louder, closing in. Daniel cursed under his breath, gripping the drive so tightly his knuckles whitened. Lucas urged them to move, but Elena stood frozen. She realized the danger wasn't what terrified her most. It was the growing truth that her marriage might not survive the night. Daniel grabbed her hand, begging her to trust him one last time. She pulled away. Trust wasn't something she could give on command anymore. Lucas stepped between them, saying this wasn't the time to fight. They needed to get out of sight. The engine noise echoed through the metal structures as headlights swept across the lot. Elena ducked behind a container with the others, heart racing. Daniel whispered that he would fix everything once they survived this. Elena didn't answer. She hugged her knees, trembling as the headlights crept closer like searching eyes. Someone was coming. Someone who knew exactly where to find them. The headlights stopped. The engine cut off. Silence fell so suddenly, Elena felt her heartbeat louder than the night itself. Lucas leaned forward, squinting into the shadows. Daniel whispered that if they were caught, The drive needed to disappear, no matter what. Elena stared at him, realizing he wasn't talking about running anymore. He was talking about sacrifice. Before she could respond, a car door slammed. Heavy footsteps crunched across gravel. Lucas whispered for them to stay down and crept toward the edge of the container. Elena grabbed Daniel's sleeve, her voice trembling as she told him she couldn't lose him, not after everything. He touched her cheek just once before pulling away. Lucas signaled that someone was approaching from the right side. Elena felt sweat slide down her spine as a shadow stretched across the ground, long and slow. Someone stopped inches from where they hid. A voice slid through the darkness, calm, cold, and certain. "You can't hide forever." Elena's breath stilled. The past had caught them. The footsteps paused on the other side of the container, their rhythm slow and deliberate. Elena held her breath, praying the pounding in her chest wouldn't give them away. Lucas raised a finger to his lips, leaning just enough to see around the metal edge. His jaw tightened. Daniel whispered her name, barely audible, as if preparing her for the unthinkable. She squeezed his hand, and for the first time since the nightmare began, she felt the weight of what loving him truly meant. It wasn't just devotion. It was survival. A low voice drifted through the darkness, calling Daniel by his buried name, taunting him for running so long. Elena felt the words slice through the cold air. Lucas moved first, stepping out with fearless precision. Daniel followed, pulling Elena behind him, choosing confrontation over hiding. The intruder emerged fully into view, a second figure stepping from the car's shadow. Elena's stomach dropped. There were two of them now, both armed with nothing but their certainty that Daniel's life belonged to them. Lucas stood between them all, ready for what came next. Daniel stepped forward before Lucas could stop him. He raised the drive high enough for the intruders to see, but far enough away to keep it out of reach. He told them the truth, that he never wanted to use it, that he only kept it because the world they built was too dangerous to trust. One of the men scoffed, calling him naive. Elena felt her throat tighten as a flashlight beam suddenly snapped on, cutting across the container and blinding them. Daniel shielded her instinctively. Lucas barked at them to drop the light, but they ignored him, stepping closer in slow, controlled strides. The taller intruder told Daniel to hand over the drive and walk away. Elena wanted to scream, wanted to grab Daniel and run, but her feet felt nailed to the ground. Daniel didn't move. He whispered that he wouldn't let them hurt her. The intruder tilted his head, amused by Daniel's sudden courage. Elena watched Daniel take one steady breath, and for the first time she saw the man he had been hiding all along. Daniel lowered the drive slightly, his voice steady for the first time since the chaos began. He told the intruders they would never see it again if they took one more step. They laughed, certain he was bluffing. But Lucas understood the danger in Daniel's tone. He stepped closer, trying to negotiate, warning the men that this was a fight they couldn't win cleanly. The intruders didn't care. One reached for something inside his coat. Elena's breath caught. Daniel reacted instantly. He threw the drive toward the far end of the lot, sending it skidding beneath a stack of metal pallets. The intruders swore and chased after it. Lucas grabbed Elena and Daniel, pulling them into the shadows of another container. The three ran, feet pounding the gravel, hearts racing faster. Elena stumbled, but Daniel caught her arm. She felt the terror break through her ribs, but also something else: determination. The truth had torn her world apart, but now it forced her to fight for what remained. Behind them, angry voices erupted as the intruders searched the darkness for the missing drive. They didn't stop running until Lucas pushed them into the narrow gap between two storage units, their chests heaving. Daniel braced one hand against the wall, gasping for breath, while Elena held her knees, trying not to collapse. They heard shouting in the distance, the intruders arguing, footsteps scattering across the gravel. Lucas whispered that they had seconds, maybe less, before the men found their trail. He pointed to a service ladder leading up to the roof of a container. It wasn't safety, but it was height and height, meant time. Daniel helped Elena climb, his hands steady despite the tremor in his voice. When they reached the top, moonlight spread across the lot, revealing the vast, silent maze they had been running through. Elena felt the wind hit her face, carrying the cold truth that nothing about this night would leave them unchanged. Lucas climbed up after them, whispering that the intruders were splitting up. Elena looked at Daniel, seeing fear and love warring in his eyes. She asked him the one question she had avoided until now. If we survive this, who are you going to be? Daniel didn't have an answer. The intruders moved closer, their voices rising with frustration. Lucas whispered that the only way out was distraction. Daniel shook his head, insisting he wouldn't leave Elena again. Not tonight, not ever. Elena's throat tightened. She saw a shift in Daniel, something breaking open. Maybe fear, maybe courage, maybe both. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the photo the intruder had tossed earlier. He stared at it for a long second, then tore it cleanly in half. The sound was small, but it felt like a declaration. Lucas moved to the far edge of the roof and dropped down silently to lure the intruders away. Once he vanished into the shadows, Elena and Daniel remained alone. The lot felt quiet, except for the heavy beat of danger closing in. Daniel took Elena's hand, not with desperation, but with honesty. He told her he never wanted this life, never wanted these secrets, but he would face every consequence if it meant protecting her. Elena felt tears well, but this time they weren't only from fear. They were from truth, finally spoken. As the intruder's footsteps thundered closer, Daniel whispered his final plea. Choose me, even if you don't forgive me yet. And Elena, with her world burning around her, whispered back, I'm choosing the truth. Then a flashlight beam hit their faces.